And when I did play sports, I loved it. I really did. That was the saving grace of keeping my grades up, because I knew I had to keep a certain GPA to be able to play. And so I knew that if I didn't do that, I couldn't play sports, and I loved playing sports. Having said that, I don't think I ever would have got a scholarship offer for anything. I was just average, but I did start most of the time, most every sport that I played, but it was a lot of fun for me.
It's not a matter of how fast, how far, or even where we run. Whether we run 1 mile or 100 miles, we are on a journey and embracing where it leads us. This is Running for Distance.
All right, guys, thank you for joining me on Running for Distance. I appreciate you guys listening in and supporting the channel. And, you know, whether you're tuning in during the day or the evening like we are recording now, weekends or days, whatever, it doesn't matter as long as you're here. As I like to say, whether you're running 1 mile or running 100 miles, we are running for distance of some kind. Whether you're truly running, hopefully you're not running from the law, and the way I see it is we run a race, and that race is not always on the track. That race is not always on the streets. We are in a race in our lives. Some days it's a sprint, and some days it's a marathon. But regardless, we do have a race that is set before us, and it's up to us how we live that life. And so that's kind of the focus on where we're going with Running for Distance. The next several weeks, I'm doing a 7-part series. It's just something I really wanted to do. And Mike Outler from Georgia is with me tonight to kick things off. And so I think that's awesome. It's going to be different. So just prepare yourselves. Just listen and just allow the Lord to touch you and bless you and speak to you however you can. Just be open-minded. That's how I like to say. It's just be receptive. And I appreciate you guys listening in and watching. This is different. This is a different thing for me. It's not going to be the same old, just talking about Mike's running background. We'll talk some running, but we're going to talk a little bit more, some deeper stuff too. So the next 7 weeks, we're going to dig into some faith as well as fitness and how it applies to us as men in the body of Christ as well as our families. And so that's just something that's been on my heart for a long time. And I finally decided, you know what, I'm going to pull the trigger and I'm going to go ahead and go with it. So welcome to the program tonight, Mike. I appreciate you joining me. I know it's been a while for us to get things coordinated, but as we both know, as working adults, things sometimes just don't happen the way we want it to, but it's all in God's timing. And so it lined up perfectly for tonight. So thanks for joining me tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. I do appreciate that. And it has been kind of a touch and go type of thing with being parents, being husbands, dads, and employees or employers. You find yourself, sometimes you feel like a milkshake with about 50 straws sticking out of you, and it's just sucking the life out of you.
Or a punching bag. I mean, honestly.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
And so just to kind of give a little background, as I mentioned, Mike lives in Georgia. He was born in Blackshear, Georgia. And so which part of Georgia are you in now, Mike?
I'm in southeast Georgia, or southeast coastal Georgia. A lot of people around the United States don't even realize Georgia has a coast to it. There's an ocean right next door to us.
Yes.
We have a few islands, St. Simon's Island, Jekyll Island, Sea Island, if you're familiar with JFK Jr., where he had his wedding, and I think the G8 summit a number of years back was held there. And there's some other historical islands. Sapelo Island was an old historical island. It was, if I'm not mistaken, it was, I don't know a lot of the history of it, but there was, I think they were given to slaves after slavery. And once again, I apologize if I'm getting that wrong, but it's very historical. So we're about an hour north of Jacksonville, Florida, and about an hour south of Savannah, Georgia, right on I-95, Interstate 95.
Yeah, you're not far from the beach at all.
Mm-mm. No, so not at all.
When Mike and I talk, he talks about the humidity being high. We already know that Georgia is hot and humid, but being there on the coast, you got the major humidity that comes with it. And it's not dry heat. It's humid. And so you get plenty of opportunity to shed some pounds and sweat away.
Yeah,
But
no doubt.
I have to say I'm a little envious because, I would love to be, I used to live in Houston, and, I was about an hour and a half, 2 hours from the beach. We didn't go very often. But man, I would love to be able to be that close to, where you're at. You're pretty close to a great part of the country. Like you said, a lot of history in Georgia, with the South and, all the stuff that goes on with the Civil War and, those types of things. I'm a big history buff as well. And so you start looking at the history stuff. I could geek out on that all night long and, dig into, you start talking about tobacco industry and slavery and all those types of things. Absolutely. But that's not what we're here for tonight, right? We're going to talk about a different type of history. So, but yeah, Mike came from Georgia. He moved around. He's been in Georgia and Florida and Ohio. Is that right?
Nope, Michigan.
Michigan and Northern Virginia. And and so Mike, Mike's done a lot of different things. And I think that's, we were just talking before we jumped on here, is Mike has a very diverse background, which I think is really cool because it's not boring. There's a lot of different things, Mike. I know we could talk about a lot of your past and go a lot of different directions, which I think is great because it talks about, you're not a boring person. I don't care what anybody would say. There's something that we could dig into that's cool because, you talk about a lot of different color here. You were in the Army. You spent 5 years in the Army. You served as an Airborne Ranger. And I always think about the song, I Want to Be an Airborne Ranger. And so, first of all, thank you for your service and for sacrificing for our country. That is an honor. And I don't take that lightly. I've got a lot of family that has served, and you know what? It's definitely an honor. And so thank you for that. But not only that, if you think about it, Airborne Ranger, who doesn't want to jump out of airplanes, right? And, I'm sure you have had some pretty interesting experiences doing that and doing different missions and things like that. I don't know if you ever saw any kind of combat or anything, but maybe you could touch a little bit on that. I know we're going to jump into a lot of different things, but I like to find some different things and dig into it. So let's talk a little bit about your experience into the Army and how it kind of shaped and molded you as an individual and as a man, because, a man's man in the Army, come on, right? It doesn't get much better than that.
Right. Yeah. I guess to set a little bit of a backdrop and how I ended up joining the Army. I graduated high school in 1989 in a place called Fernandina Beach, Florida. And I could have been a really good student. I always joke and say that my favorite part of school was summer. I just did not like school at all. I didn't want to be there. I'd rather have been surfing. That was my thing to do if I wasn't playing sports, would be surfing. And so I say that jokingly. I wish I would have studied harder back then. But I'm the youngest of 3 boys in my family, and my parents tried their best to raise me to be a disciplined kid, but I tended to be more of a knucklehead and didn't want to do what they wanted me to do a lot of times. I earned the name Dennis the Menace when I was a little kid, growing up with bleach blonde hair. Always seemed to be getting into trouble of some sort. And after I graduated high school, I had it in my heart and mind to join the Army and didn't really say anything to anybody or my parents, and kind of talked about it, and they didn't really, they just kind of brushed it off. This kid who's undisciplined won't even make his bed in the morning. This way he's going to join the Army. And so I came home one day and I said, Dad, I signed up to join the Army. And he said, okay. And he said, what makes you want to do that? He was not against the military at all. He was, my dad brought me up in a very patriotic home. But he understood my background and my lack of discipline. And in all of my youthful wisdom, I said, because I'm sick and tired of y'all's rules around here. Why would I ever say something like that? And honest to God, my dad looked at me and asked me what I'd been smoking. He was like, "What's wrong with you, son?" And I said, "Well, and I think God really knew what I needed. I didn't necessarily know that I needed that. I knew I needed a different direction in my life. And I did well in the Army as far as appreciating the discipline, appreciating the structure that it gave me. So many different things, discipline, physical discipline, whether it's work discipline, things like that. I had a pretty good work ethic. I didn't have a problem working. I just didn't want to listen to my parents necessarily, but I grew up pretty quick while I was in the Army and learned to appreciate how I had it, and had since gone back and told them such, and told them that, I was very sorry for how I treated them and how rebellious I was. And I'm glad I did. Both my parents have since passed on or in heaven, but while they were active and alive, I did tell them while I was in the Army, I said, look, I owe you an apology. Y'all aren't as dumb as I said you were. You're pretty smart people. And that's the kind of teenager I was. But I spent 5 years in the Army. When I first joined the Army, I didn't know the difference between an Airborne Ranger and a Park Ranger, really. I knew I wanted to be in the infantry. And I don't know if you've heard of the ASVAB test. Mm-hmm. I think most of us took it in high school. Yeah, take it in high school. And back in our day, most times people just Christmas treat it, just put whatever they wanted to because they didn't really care. And so I did that. And, the recruiter said, you got, enough to join the infantry or whatever. And then whenever I wanted to go into the Airborne Rangers, I had to retake the ASVAB, because you have to have a little bit higher score than just the average for that. And so I retook the ASVAB, made enough to qualify for that, and went off and joined the Army Rangers. I was in my first duty station was not with an Airborne Ranger battalion. It was with the 25th Infantry Division in Hawaii. So I leave Fernandina Beach, Florida, and after my basic training, I go to Schofield Barracks in Hawaii on the island of Oahu, and spent 3 years there. So that was rough duty. Yeah. And then I spent my last 2 years in Savannah at Hunter Army Airfield. It's home of the 1st Ranger Battalion. And I spent my last 2 years there, serving there, and then I got out after that. So,
is there a particular reason why you got out, or you just wanted to get out?
The reason why I got out was, number one, I wanted to change my job, or as the military would call it, your MOS. Mm-hmm. But during the early and mid 90s, it was hard to do that. And I wanted to change it to something besides just shooting at people and getting shot at. So I wanted to do something in the medical field. And there was no openings whatsoever. I tried to switch. At that time, I tried to switch to the Air Force, and I was going to do Air Force pararescue, which does involve medical training. And I couldn't switch branches either at the time. Everything was so over capacity, 100% capacity. And they wouldn't let me. So I said, I'm going to get out and go to school instead. And at that time, I was really struggling and internally struggling with God's calling in my life. And I really didn't have that solidified yet. But I thought, I guess maybe this is a sign from God that I probably need to go ahead and do this. And so that's what I did. I went ahead and got out and went to college.
So, you get out of the Army, you got structure and discipline, which we all need that in our lives, right? Structure, especially for, a punk kid, troubled kids, but even good kids need discipline and structure, because as we both know, as you get into your later life,
and jobs, you got to have some discipline because,
Mhm.
as adults, you can't sit there and play video games all day while you're working because it won't last, right? You'll end up getting
Right.
fired. And so you got to have that discipline. So you get discipline instilled in you. You've got kind of that, as a ranger, you got kind of that tough guy mentality drilled into you, right? You're tough as
Mhm.
nails. You're jumping out of airplanes. You're getting shot at. You get out and you go to Trinity Baptist College in Jacksonville, and
Mhm.
which you go there. You didn't graduate, and
Right.
then you go on and you continue to Louisiana Baptist College with
Mhm.
no degree. Now, I wanted to ask you because I can't, no judgment here because I didn't get a degree for a while. I did the college thing on, cross country and track scholarship and had a little too much fun and learned some hard lessons, right? Um,
Mhm.
but I was going to ask you because, you went to the colleges there, but then you end up going into full-time ministry. And
Yep.
so my question for you, Mike, is, and because I know just based off of my knowledge, in most instances, you've got to go through something to get, you know, licensed,
Ordained. Yeah.
ordained to go into ministry. Take us through that as far as that transition goes, because you're going through college and you go into ministry. What did you do as far as the transition there? Where did you go to get licensed or ordained?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of times, and it depends really, I think, on your denomination as to how, uh, what avenue you have to go through. And I grew up a Baptist, um, mainly in the Southern Baptist Convention, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, more or less, and then switched over to, I think it's about after I joined or after I got out of the Army, I went and was more of an independent Baptist, which really not a whole lot of difference. It's just the way they're structured.
Sure.
Um, and it varies from church to church. But at the time when I was in Jacksonville, we ended up moving back to the Fernandina Beach or Yulee area. It's another small town right outside of Fernandina Beach. And I was doing vocational ministry, youth ministry type thing, along with working a full-time job. And I had felt God's calling on my life to go full time. And I was, really searching after that. Um, and it was my former in-laws, my now ex-wife, her parents, her dad is a pastor, um, and or was a pastor then. I think he's in the missions field now, but he was a pastor, and they had moved to Michigan, and so there was a connection there. While I was still struggling to finish school and married and have children and procrastination. I will honestly add that to it. A lot of that was going on too. And an opportunity that came up to take a full-time position as a youth pastor in Michigan, right outside of Detroit. And we went up and checked the place out and met the pastor. It was at another church besides, it's, I don't know, maybe an hour away from where my father-in-law was at the time. And great pastor, great family, great church. We stayed there for a short time, and one thing led to another, and there was a smaller church that opened up, another independent Baptist church that opened up that needed a pastor. And the way that went down was my name got thrown into the ring, and it was through my father-in-law once again. And said, "Hey, you can do this. You can try it out." And they said, "Well, why don't you come and speak one Sunday?" And it was really just to fill in for a vacancy there. And so my current boss and pastor said, "Yeah, you can go ahead and do that. Sure, no problem." So I did that. And then I didn't think anything else of it. And one thing led to another. They called me and said, "Hey, we'd like for you to consider, being our pastor." And I thought to myself, there's no way in the world. What am I going to do? How in the world can I ever do that? And I got a lot of encouragement from people. Really, a lot of people prayed for us, and and helped me through that. You know, my then father-in-law, he wasn't too far away, and he said, you know, if you ever have a question, you know, you can always ask me. I'm just right around the corner, you know, and you know, and so I felt that encouragement, and he was an encouragement, along with a lot of other people. And so I went back. I think I spoke one more time, and then they said, "Well, you know, the church voted and wants you to be the pastor." And I was just about sick to my stomach. It's like the scariest thing. It was a church. I think it was around maybe 30 to 35 adults on a Sunday morning. So it was a very small church. It had dwindled down to nothing. It was just a lot of great people there, but it was a lot of older couples that went to church there, and they were looking for somebody younger to come and pastor the church. And we went there, and it was the people were great. The style of ministry was not really what I was looking for. It was a lot of it was old fashioned, and I will say I don't have a problem with that. If that's the way a church wants to operate, if they want to be the type of church that, you know, they want to sing from the hymn book, like we did growing up, if you grew up in church, that's not a problem. That's just another style of ministry. You know, there's nothing to be said negative about it. It's just not, it wasn't my style. And they really weren't as open to change or as quickly as I wanted to change it. Because I wanted to get it, you know, a little more up to date with the style of worship and that sort of thing. And so I personally struggled with that. You know, it was just an internal struggle. And then from there, we stayed there a little more than a year. The church had, you know, God had blessed it, and it got up to about 100 people or so. And some younger families were there, but I was really miserable personally. It was just me. I was just struggling with that. And I didn't feel like, okay, I've had my taste of being the lead pastor, the senior pastor, whatever you want to call it. And I was the only staff member. I was the pastor, the secretary, the grass mower, you know, everything. And that's fine. But I thought, you know what, being the senior pastor was not something that I really felt like I needed to be. I felt like my desire was to be in a church that was a little more modern in its approach. Having said that, the gospel never changes. It's your methods. You know, your message stays the same, but your methods may change. And so that's what I wanted. I really desired that. And so through a connection that I had, there was a church right outside of Washington, D.C. in Fairfax, Virginia, that was looking for a singles pastor and kind of doing more administrative things. It already had a senior pastor. They already had a youth pastor, and I think a children's pastor as well. It was a church with a little over 1,000 people in it, so it had a bigger staff. In fact, a little claim to fame with this church, it was when we got there, they still had an academy, and K through 12 academy, and that was where Toby Mac, if you know the singer, Toby Mac went to school all his life, and graduated high school, and that's the place he started DC Talk from. If you're familiar with that contemporary music,
one of my favorite musicians, actually.
Yeah, really, really cool. So I got to know his dad, as we always called him Daddy Mac. Ken McKeon was his name. Yep. But anyway, we were there for a few years, and we stayed there, I guess, for about 4 years, and saw a lot of growth in that church. We enjoyed it, really did. But after about 4 years, my marriage, my now ex-wife and I were having marital problems. And at the same time, my parents were down here in South Georgia, and my dad had emphysema and COPD, and his health was declining rapidly. And so we left the ministry full time and moved back down here and got out of the ministry full time after that. That was the last of being in ministry, paid ministry for me.
That's I can relate because I've been in similar positions that you have. It's not easy to jump into ministry. You know, it's not a job. It is a calling. It is, you know, much more than that. It's a commitment, right? And it definitely, I've seen it from my own self, and I've seen it on so many other people to where, you know, much like you said, you know, you started having marital problems and struggles, and it's not because you don't know how to make things work. You know, so many times ministry is demanding, and it gets to be a struggle because, and this resonates so much with me because I was a youth pastor, and you know, I left for reasons just very similar to you, because you have to be very flexible, and you almost have to put yourself to the side, right? And I can relate to that because my wife and I actually, we were actually house parents for the Oklahoma Baptist Homes for Children, raising, you know, 8 girls that were aged between 8 years of age to 18, right? They were either wards of the state, or they're orphans, or whatever it might be the situation. But one of the things is you have to basically put your own life and your own self on the back burner, and you have to expand yourself to where you meet the needs of everybody else, which is, you know, as far as being a man of God, I mean, you know, as Jesus would, he put others' needs before his own. But it's very exhausting and very demanding. And so I can completely relate to that. No matter how hard you try, it's such a very delicate fine line as far as balance goes, to walk that and be able to stay, you know, spiritually healthy, but also have a healthy life at home. And not to say that you weren't doing anything right or you weren't doing anything wrong. It's challenging. And that's, unfortunately, you see so many in the ministry burn out, or something happens and they have to step away. You know, very similar situation for myself. Mine was all volunteer. And it got to where I was like, I've got to step out, and this is just too much. But, you know, there's other ways to minister. You don't have to have that full-time pastor to be a minister, right? I just like what I'm doing now. I see it as Jesus in the marketplace, right? You can do things that aren't under the traditional approach of being in a church. That's the last place most people will want to even venture. That's one of the desires I have of this podcast and going different directions is I pray that somebody that doesn't want to, darken the halls of a church can get ministered to or be touched just listening to a podcast or watching a video. They're more likely to run across that and get touched because there's no pressure, right? It's not the what's the word I can't even think of the word. But anyways, it's just the expectation, right? It's a lot of people are pushed away, or they've been hurt, and so many people are out there hurting. And I know so many people that watch these videos or even listen to these podcasts, they may not ever go into a church, but I know we all hurt and we all struggle. And that's one of the things I wanted to kind of dive into, Mike, is, you know, we all have struggles and we all have battles. You've been through battle as an Army Ranger. You've been through battles as a pastor and as a husband. And they're all different, but yet they're all unique and sometimes very similar. And I oftentimes, as you would know, listening to my podcast, I talk about the correlation of running and fitness, ultra running, as the walk that Christ would have for us, or just in life in general, because you have the struggles, you have the ups and the downs, you have the great, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I know you attempted a 50 50K, the Sky to Summit, but you DNF'd. But that's okay.
Yep.
That happens. Just like you said,
Yeah.
it was brutal and you didn't have enough hill training. Okay. So
Yep.
you got to go back and you got to try to train. But yet you've also done some training to where you went out and you ran a marathon on very little training and did a pretty good job. And it's like you can go out and do anything you put your mind to. But even if you don't finish a race like you did in that Sky to Summit, you learn a lot from the times when you, as I would say, hit the dust, bite the dirt. You know, it's not always easy. I know from my DNFs, I learned more about myself. I learned more about who I am and how running doesn't always apply to me. But you spend a lot of time thinking things through, right, and analyzing things. So Mike, take me back to, I mean, I know, you know, you went in and you became a pastor, and I'm going to assume that you grew up in the church, but I don't necessarily assume. That's just kind of,
right.
You know, a lot of times when people go into the ministry, they have that influence in their life from an early age. But kind of take this into when you became a believer in Christ, and kind of shape it as far as your testimony goes. If there was a particular instance that really allowed you to see God working, and it allowed you to move into that transformation and have that, upper room experience, or if it was just something where you grew up and that was just kind of the expectation, and as some people would say, fake it until you make it, and you just become part of it because, you grew up that way. How was it for you?
Well, growing up, like I said, I'm the youngest of three boys, and grew up in a home. I have absolutely no horror stories about my childhood. In fact, it would, outside of my Dennis the Menace antics, it was pretty boring, really. Funny stories, some funny stories, but I grew up in a really good home. I grew up, I don't, and I'm certainly not making light of anybody who grew up in an abused home, or an alcoholic parent, or parents on drugs or something like that. Don't want to minimize that at all. I only say that I'm very blessed that I grew up in a home where mom and dad said, I love you. Mom and dad encouraged me. Mom and dad encouraged each other. We weren't perfect. It's like I heard a pastor say a long time ago, but I'll never, ever forget this. He told us, he said, he was talking to us teenagers. He said, teenagers, you know what? Your parents are not perfect. And of course that got a lot of giggles, out of the congregation. And he said, but you know what though? Your parents don't have perfect children either. So none of us were perfect. But my parents did the best they could. They raised us in a godly home. And I did grow up going to church. Part of the time was at the Baptist church, and part of it was at the Methodist church. And I say the Methodist church. Grew up in a really small town where that pretty much was it as far as what was close to us. But I heard the gospel from an early age. And once again, like I said, my parents weren't perfect, but I got to experience the gospel with love and forgiveness and discipline, rebuke. Did I ever get the rebukes? I deserved it. I always say to people that when I woke up, my parents would give me a spanking right when I woke up, because they knew I'd need one eventually during the day. So they'd go ahead and get it out of the way, but not really what happened. But I did get disciplined, in the right way. I grew up in the kind of home where, mom and dad would challenge you. They were disciplinarians, they expected you to do things a certain way. But they also backed it up with love. And so I saw that from an early age. And I think that helped my heart be tender to the gospel when I finally decided. I think it was around when I was 14, maybe going on 15. I'm not sure exactly what the day was, but I remember being in church, and I finally realized that, hey, you know what? Number one, I'm a sinner. There's nothing I can do to earn my way to heaven. There's no amount of money I can put in the offering plate to get my way to heaven. I can't do it because my parents are going to heaven. It's a personal decision. It's not a religion. It's about a relationship with Christ. And I remember asking Christ to come into my heart, realizing that Jesus died on the cross for me, and that he was rose again after the third day. And he wants to have a personal relationship with me. And yeah, that does involve going to church and being fed spiritually, but also being a blessing to other people in church. But it is about a relationship and not a ritual. And so I accepted Christ as my Savior as a young man, and shortly thereafter got baptized in that same church and began my walk with Christ, and had a lot of stumbles. A lot of times I didn't want to do what God wanted me to do. Dennis the Menace ways. Yeah.
And, at that age, it's such a hard age to be, in high school, junior high, high school, and like you said, you've got stumbles, and you're still trying to feel your way, grow as an individual. But here you are, truly have given your life to Christ. I was about the same age. I was 13 when I truly made that commitment. And I still remember it was hard, because you've got friends that don't believe the same way, or are not a part of a church family. You've got friends that are, and so then, much like we are today, you've got that balance, right? You want to have friends, you want to be popular, or be seen as somebody that you want to hang out with. I know you grew up playing sports all your life. I'm not sure if you were real athletic as far as high school goes. I would anticipate you are, or you were.
Yeah.
But, when you're an athlete in school, as you know, you're generally accepted. I was just talking to some parents this last week. It's like, when you're an athlete in school, you kind of have that, you're part of the group, right? You're part of a select group, regardless of what sports you play. Whether it's track and field, or cross country, or basketball, or football, or baseball, or volleyball, or whatever, you're seen as an athlete, student athlete. And there's a whole different perception. It doesn't matter how good you are, it doesn't matter how bad you are, you're part of the team. And so you have been embraced, right? And you're not necessarily looking from the outside in. But then you throw in the dynamic of being a Christian in public schools is not always easy. So I wanted to ask you if you ever had that kind of experience growing up in sports, if there was ever any discrepancy with your teammates and yourself on, as far as your faith goes, being a student athlete and a teenager growing up as a brand new Christian.
I wouldn't say discrepancies growing up. It was similar in the sense that you either went to one church or the other, or one of the churches, or you just didn't go. And I think in the late 70s and early 80s, and throughout the 80s in school, standing out, at least in my viewpoint, standing out as a Christian, I don't think was as difficult as it is today. I don't think you were targeted quite as much. It seemed to be more the norm, at least in living in the Bible Belt, and it wasn't one of those things where you're kind of, I'm trying to think of the word for it, where, if you go over here, you're in this camp, and if you go over there, you're not in a cool camp. But, when it comes to being a jock, you were labeled that way. And I guess some people would look at you a little bit different. The temptations and trials of teenagers still hit me, and still come at you full force, and trying to figure out who you are in this world, and you wrestle between that and what you're supposed to be asking, what God expects of you, and then you're wrestling that with your sinful nature of how am I supposed to be in front of other people, and how am I supposed to because a lot of times teenagers don't want to be standing out. And as a Christian, you do stick out like a sore thumb at times, whether you wear the T-shirt or not. And certain people have expectations of you. how you talk, where you go on the weekends and that sort of thing. So there's that dynamic with that.
What sports did you play when you were in school?
Growing up, when I was real little, as soon as I could start T-ball, I started T-ball, and then Little League baseball all the way up through. I didn't play baseball in high school. I played football all the way up until, let's see, when was it? 10th grade football, and I had a knee injury. I can tell you about that some other time if you ask about it, but they ended up with surgery on my knee. I love football. That was my number one sport. And I played golf one year. I tried, that was a little bit less contact for somebody with a knee injury. And I did play soccer for a couple of years when I was in junior high. Tried that. My hand at that.
So as an individual that's gone through, even with a knee injury, not being able to compete in sports as most of us would like, and I know you've recovered and you've been able to do other things. How did something like that, and even now, Mike, because I know recently you were dealing with a foot issue or an ankle issue, I think is what it was, if I don't remember correctly. So I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But how does that test your faith? Because, here we are, athletic. We've been blessed with gifts. Yes, not everybody has the same gifts, but we are blessed with the ability to do different things. How does that test you as a believer when you get injured and you're not able to do something that you thoroughly enjoy, whether it's running or biking or baseball, whatever it might be? You're going along and you can't do it anymore. That has been taken away from you. How has that tested you?
I would say it depends really on which injury you're talking about. I've had 2 knee surgeries, exactly 20 years apart. To go back to the first one back in 1987, I tore my ACL and my medial meniscus pretty bad. And I think it was just I tore it playing soccer. Specifically, that's when it went all downhill for me. But I think probably the best word to describe it was frustrating, because with an injury like that back in 1987, when they wanted to do surgery on it, and they did do surgery on it, it's not like how they do it now. Back in 87, when they did surgery on my knee, they repaired the ACL and they took out most of my meniscus, and then they put me in a device where I couldn't move my leg or bend my knee joint for 2 weeks. So atrophy set in. I looked like I had 1 leg and 3 arms, man. I mean, it shriveled up to nothing. My left leg did. And it took 6 months of rehab, physical therapy, for me to gain my strength back after that. So that was very, very frustrating. I think at the time my thoughts were, woe is me, why me? Why, and when I did play sports, I loved it. I really did. That was the saving grace of keeping my grades up, because I knew I had to keep a certain GPA to be able to play. And so I knew that if I didn't do that, I couldn't play sports, and I loved playing sports. Having said that, I don't think I ever would have got a scholarship offer for anything. I was just average, but I did start most of the time, most every sport that I played, but it was a lot of fun for me. I wasn't a standout. Didn't have schools looking at me, but it was very frustrating, because you have to sit back and wait. Now, fast forward 20 years to 2007. I was training for a 5K. It was a charity race in Northern Virginia, and hadn't had a knee issue in the world. I jumped out of a plane or a helicopter 44 times and never had a knee injury. I ran on hard pavement for 5 years in the Army and never had an issue. You get to 2007 and I'm running along on this race, and there was about a half mile left of it, and I stepped off of a sidewalk. It was in a residential neighborhood, stepped off the sidewalk and felt something pop. It sounded like a shotgun going off. I was by myself. There wasn't too many people on this race. And I felt it pop and my knee buckled and I stopped immediately. And all I felt was this burning sensation. It was worse than what it was back in '87. And I knew I'd done something wrong. And I said, well, I can either be miserable for the next half mile and walk, or I can just go ahead and run. And so that's what I did. I just sucked it up and ran because I knew if I could get there quickly and finish up, I could sit down.
Sure.
So that's what I did. And I ended up going through surgery. The doctor told me the physician I saw in Georgetown, he did an MRI and he brings me back, I guess, a few days later. I don't remember exactly when it was. It's a funny story. He's had both of his knees replaced. This doctor's physician. He said, you don't need to be running ever again. He said, you need to learn to pick up a bicycle and ride a bike. It's no impact on your knees. I'm not really listening to this guy. I just want him to tell me what's wrong with me. So he pulls up the MRI on his computer and he says, I can't find anything. So I'm thinking, dude, you don't know what the pain I just felt the other day. I said, there's something wrong with me. He said, no, what I mean is I can't find your ACL. And I said, what do you mean? I'm thinking they didn't take it out 20 years ago. And come to find out, when he did the surgery, my ACL had completely exploded and disintegrated to nothing. And it was wrapped around the back part of my knee is where he ended up finding part of it. But what I ended up having was a cadaver ACL put in my knee from a cadaver from a donor. And it has, thank the Lord, it has worked like a charm since then. I've not had any issues with it since 2007. And I rehab with that one much differently. I get done with the surgery. It was outpatient surgery. He gave me a set of crutches and he said, hospital policy is we got to roll you out in a wheelchair, but from there, you're going to walk on crutches. He said, do not use the crutches more than 48 hours and start walking after that. And so I did. 48 hours later, I'm walking around and I went to one physical therapy appointment. They showed me some exercises to do, hand me a piece of paper and said, here's your exercises and have a nice life. And 3 months later, I was back doing running again. So much different philosophy. Still very frustrated at it because, I had to have this surgery and I'm thinking, what's next? But how it affects, I guess that was a long answer, but how it affects my faith, it really honestly depends on the injury. I know some of it was, and it's just like in life, some things you bring upon yourself. This injury that I had on the side of my foot here recently, I think that was part of me overtraining, not being patient enough and gradually getting up in my miles and up in my exercises on a slower pace. At 50 years old now, I can't go quite as fast as I used to. Mentally, I think I can, but our bodies don't recover quite as fast. So, and that's a lot like life. A lot of times we get in the predicaments that we're in because of the choices that we make, right? And it's that way a lot of times with injuries. I know it is with me. And sometimes I have to look at it and go, you know what? If I wouldn't have trained that hard, I might not be in the position I'm in. So absolutely.
So, perseverance, endurance, you've been through a lot, you've gone through a lot. You've rehabbed from 2 knee injuries. It's not easy to rehab from one. Fortunately, I've never been in that position, but I've had plenty of other similar injuries where, it's debilitating. It's frustrating. You want to go out and do the things, but you can't, and you have to resist. Right. And, you're faced with temptation. It's like the times that I'm injured are when I probably want to do things the most, because that's when you realize you really appreciate the gift, right? And then that gift has been either taken away or it's on hold, and it's frustrating. Right. It's like, why? And just like you mentioned, Mike, you said, woe is me. It's like, what did I do? And you got to learn to adapt and pivot and change things up. And it's like, what do? Well, you find things that you can do. Just you may have to change things up, right? And
Yeah.
It's always interesting to watch athletes, especially when they're like at the pinnacle of their career. They're oftentimes judged by whether they hung it up too early, according to what people perceived, or they stuck around too long. Well, we don't know, because you and I both know, here I am about to be 46. You're a little older than I am. But as you mentioned, our bodies don't respond the way they used to when we were 18, 19 years of age. But
Right.
our minds are still sharp. Our minds, our minds tell us we can do it. And, we have the
Yeah.
mind of Christ. He gives us the ability, the desire to do these things. The body's just beat up and run down. And as we know, it's like, the body is just decaying more and more every day. Yeah, that's why it's important to take care of yourself. But your body's just not going to respond like it did 30 years ago. We think we
Right.
can.
Oh yeah.
But then you
Yeah,
push
no doubt.
yourself. And like you said, there's things that are self-inflicted. So we become stubborn. And we learn hard lessons, because sometimes things happen and it's out of our control. And then there's some things that happen that could have been prevented had we exercised better self-control, right? And not been so stubborn, and not jumped out of the rehab quicker than we should have and started running and training against doctor's orders or what it might be, and totally went through the healing. And sometimes it's best to just completely shut it down and not do it anymore. But that's easier said than done. And so you've got these athletes that end at the end of their career. They sometimes they don't get that championship. Sometimes they do get the championship, and they still come back for more.
Mhm.
We don't know, because everyone's, as we both know, athletes, it becomes an addictive thing, right? It's you love the competition, you love the challenge. And I think that's something that God instills in us, is just the desire to be a warrior mentality, somebody that wants to go out and, fight, or, battle, or, you persevere through things, you endure things. That's just ingrained in us. It's that warrior mentality. Like one of my favorite movies is Braveheart, right? And you got William Wallace, and he's a bad dude. It's like, man, just these movies where it's just exemplifies what a man should do. And it's like,
Yeah.
but then you got to take the reality of things and take a step back and say, yeah, but what should I be doing instead? We are supposed to be exercising wisdom, but we don't always use the wisdom that we've been granted.
Yeah.
And so through perseverance and the struggles and the challenges that you have gone through, Mike, is there a particular verse that has been one that you have used or have stuck with along the way that has helped you?
Yeah, I think of a few of them, and it really depends on what the particular situation is. I think about the Apostle Paul running a race. We talk about running and finishing, and I think that is important. You talked about the 50K that I did not complete. That was that really made me angry, and not at anybody else but myself, because I just clearly did not train properly for it. I didn't get injured. I just missed the cutoff time at the second rest point. And I just didn't do the hill training. I didn't expect it to be that much, but you know what? I have zero excuses for not finishing that. But finishing the race, not necessarily winning the race. I knew I wasn't going to win it.
Sure.
I did want to finish it really, really bad. I wanted to say I completed it. And I don't know, to this day, I still look back at that race and go, you know what? I am going to do that race one time. It may not be that particular course, but I will do a 50K one of these days. I will do it. And I would have kept going. I was beat down, ill prepared, but beat down. and that was my first time trying an ultra. And I loved the experience of it, but man, I was mad at myself. I wanted to throw my shoes into the ocean and be done with it after that race. I was mad.
I know that feeling all too well, but it's like, I get the frustration. You get mad at yourself, and I mean, you can't blame anybody else but yourself, because you knew that you were undertrained. You were not prepared. You didn't know what to completely expect. I mean, it was your first one. So you go into it, not prepared like you should. And I think, and that's where I will take the correlation. We oftentimes do that in our walk, in our daily walk, is we go into our lives not prepared. And that's when we get blindsided, right? We get obliterated. We get just out of pure, either whether it's ignorance or just irresponsibility or just pride, whatever it might be. And we get busy, right? And we lose our focus, and we don't train like we should. We're called to put on the full armor of God every day. And I'm guilty of it, Mike. I don't do it every day. And then yet we go into battle, right? And when we say battle, not the kind of battle that you would be as a ranger, but battle against the principalities of evil. And, whether it's a physical presence or a spiritual presence, we're battling things every day. And we so oftentimes lose our focus, and we don't train like we should. And then we miss the cut. We don't want to ultimately miss the cutoff in our run in life, because that's not what we want to hear. We want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant, proceed into heaven, right? That's what you want to hear. You don't want to miss the cutoff and say, I never knew you, right? And so it's like, that's the hard ultimate DNF right there that you don't want to experience, is missing the mark. And, it's just so important that we need to spend our days. I mean, our days are numbered. We're not promised tomorrow. And that's why I always think, I go to sleep at night, and oftentimes I don't even think about it. But the last several months, Mike, I sit there at night. I know where I'm going when I pass from this earth, but it keeps me up at night, because I'm like, I love my family and I love what I do, and I want to enjoy this life as long as I can, but it keeps me up, and I'm like, man, what if tonight was my last night? Have I done what I should be doing? Am I doing what I should be doing? And the answer most times is no, you're not doing what you should be doing. You haven't done everything that I wanted you to do. And man, it really eats at me, because I know that I'm falling short, but we all fall short of the glory of God. I mean, we, just like Paul would say, I do the things I know I shouldn't do, and I don't do the things that I know I should be doing. And it's like that thorn in your side. It's like, golly. But those are the types of things. It's like, as an ultra runner, you have to prepare. And as a former Boy Scout, and even as an Army Ranger for yourself, you've got to be prepared for every kind of situation. And as a believer, as a Christian, we've got to do the same thing. And if we don't, you're going to get off track, and it's not going to be pretty. And the injury that you suffer, or potentially could suffer, definitely could be more derailing than having to recover from an ACL or something of that nature, because it will likely result in either the loss of your life, or losing somebody that you love, or dealing with a terminal illness or something like that. And we're not prepared when those times come our way. And then we're sending up the SOSs, help me. I don't know what else to do. And, it's just hard. I just want to encourage those that are out there, and to not wait till the last minute to make decisions, not wait till the last minute and think that I've got tomorrow and I can train tomorrow. I make the same excuses in my daily walk. As fitness goes, I'll start that strength training program next week or tomorrow. You make those excuses, and then the next day becomes the next day. And we do that as believers.
Yeah.
I'll do that tomorrow. Well, we're not promised tomorrow. So when are you going to start? And, you know, there's even a Toby Mac song out there, you know, like you referenced. I love Toby Mac. And he's like, he talks about that. And he's like, if you're going to start, why not now? Right? Start now.
Yeah.
Because we can't make up lost time, and we can't make up what we did yesterday. And we can't, you know, we don't want to try to live in the future, because we got to live in the here and the now. You got to make a difference now. So what is there, Mike, is there something that you would like to share as far as encouragement with others on what they could do just to, I guess, I want to say do the right thing, but just to encourage somebody if they're struggling or if they're dealing with stuff? Is there something you want to share to where it would help them kind of maybe get over the hump and you know, get on track?
Yeah. If you're talking about from a spiritual aspect or even from a training aspect,
Either one, right? Because like I say, they both tie into each other.
Right. When you were talking just a minute ago, you were talking about preparing and trying to always be prepared for stuff. I think about what the Bible says for all of us to count the cost. You know, before we do something, we need to count the cost. And so what is this going to cost me? What is it going to cost my family as a dad and as a husband? You know, if I step out in faith in this venue or this aspect of my life, I feel like God's calling me. What is it going to cost my family? Because, you know, we don't live on an island. Every one of our decisions is going to impact people around us, whether it's a good decision or a bad decision. And I would encourage anyone listening to this that if you're struggling with something, man, reach out and not, you don't have to publicly ask for help, but just reach out to somebody who will listen. You know, in the book of Psalms, it says that there's wisdom in a multitude of counselors. That's one way to gain wisdom is through sounding board and through listening to somebody else. You know, I've been in the ministry full time for a number of years, and but I still learn a lot from other people. I still learn a lot from God's word. I'm nowhere near arrived spiritually. Still on this journey, just like anybody else is, and I still try to listen to other people's wisdom and try to listen to other people's counsel and instruction. It's vital that we do that. And so if, you know, when it comes to a fitness aspect of things, if you feel like God's impressed upon you to do something, just don't quit. Just never quit. You know, you may have heard a lot of people who've been in a special ops type of environment. You know, you have to go through a lot of qualifications to get there. And most of us would say that about quitting is, you know, you'd have to kill me before I quit. You know, a lot of times we felt like we were going to die in the training. But you know what, if that's what I wanted to do, and that is what I wanted to do, you were going to have to kill me to get me to quit. Otherwise, I'm just not quitting. So just don't give up. And reach out for help. Don't be afraid to reach out for help.
Yeah, like what you were saying, Mike. You know, it is so important to surround yourself with people that are like-minded, or, you know, to always, we should always be willing to learn and to grow. And if we become stagnant, you know, that's a dangerous place to be, right? I always get encouraged, as much as, even if I don't admit it, there's people that I'll listen to. I did have no intent to get anything out of it. And that's when I usually get that wake up call. I'll be driving down the road and I'm flipping through the stations, and I'll start listening to a message on the radio or something. Man, that's when it rocks my world, because it's like, that's when God has my attention, and I'm listening, but I'm not really listening. But then something catches my eye or my ear, and I'm like, whoa, okay. But as far as, you know, being around people, it's important, like you mentioned, reach out to somebody. Don't be alone. You're not the important thing is to not go at it alone, because we are all human. We all make mistakes and we all struggle. There's strength in numbers, as they would say. I mean, that's something that, army of one, right? The army is always together as one. The ultra running community, they're always together. There's strength in numbers. They don't want people out there by themselves trying to do it. You're not going to win any awards trying to go out and conquer a race by yourself. Use the people that are around you to help you grow. And that is especially, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to go to church. Well, it's not the church as general of going to a church to get ministered to. It's the aspect that I've always enjoyed of being in fellowship, strength in numbers, like I said. And it comes down to, in Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so another person, so one person sharpens another. That's where strength is, in numbers. You sharpen each other. You hold each other accountable. I know there's times we text each other back and forth, or I'll talk to somebody else. Hey, how are things going? What's going on? It's all about accountability, keeping each other in check, helping one another, because, it's a vicious world out there and we go through so many battles. And who wants to be alone when you're battling? It's hard. And we don't need to quit. And I know the Bible talks about it a lot. One of my favorite verses is Hebrews 12:1, where you run with perseverance, the race set before you. You don't quit. You might have to stop at an aid station and get some extra R&R and extra aid, or you might have to sit out for a little bit, but don't quit. You get knocked down, you get back up, and you keep going, and you press on towards the mark, because there is a prize set before us, and we are supposed to run the race according to that. And so important. But man, Mike, I appreciate you jumping on with me. Things don't always go as I thought they needed to go, but that's besides the point. I know we talked about that. I know that there is something in this tonight that will touch somebody, will speak to somebody. That's my prayer, that somebody will get something out of this. It was a little different format than I would have normally done, but you know what? You have to become uncomfortable, because you never want to be comfortable, right? And you got to stretch yourself. And so I appreciate you stretching with me and taking it in a different format, a different mindset tonight. And I appreciate you sharing. Definitely want to have another opportunity down the road to have some more conversation, because I think it's important that we have these types of conversations and sharing with other people. So, Mike, I appreciate you joining me tonight. And I just speak blessings over you and your family, and appreciate you being on with me. And as I tell everybody on these shows, we will see you down the trail, brother.
Yes. Thank you so much, Anthony. And I appreciate you having me on the show. And I appreciate you. I appreciate our friendship, even though it's not that old. I pray it'll continue to get that way, though.